All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another live stream. Tell me if the audio is good if you're on the live. To be able to chat in the live chat, you need to be a subscriber. So go and do that if you want to be part of the live stream like that. So today, folks, we are going to be watching a couple videos on nature and just the beauty of nature, the craziness of nature, and really, whenever you see things like the beauty and intricacies of nature, it causes people to wonder and to be in awe and just like it's just captured by the beauty of it all. And it reminds us often of the glory of God. It reminds us often of His wonder and His majesty. It reminds us of His creation, and so forth. And by what I understand, these videos, that's what they try to do. They try to like show you the wonder and the magnificence and the craziness of nature, and to show how this intricacy of nature points back to God. This intricacy of nature points back to the Creator because of how just how intricate it all is. That's just how complex it all is. So I think we'll see what they pull out. I think there are going to be some pretty interesting things. I previewed the video just a little bit and watched all of it, and there was already some pretty crazy things. So I'll watch it with you guys here to finish it off. Um, what's up, servant of Allah? Welcome to the live stream. Glad to have you. But yeah, so that's what I'm gonna be doing today. Gonna be reacting to this video and just seeing the wonder of nature. Today actually was a really beautiful day. Speaking of nature, today was a very beautiful day outside here, and I was already kind of enjoying nature as it is from a aesthetic standpoint this morning and today and after work and things. So because today was just very nice where I was, but now I will get to understand the science behind it all. But yeah, so I think we're going to enjoy this video. And again, if you enjoy these live streams, if you enjoy the videos I put out there, if you want to be part of the Like the World community, leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and become part of the community. We love to have you here, where we engage with different cultures, we learn new things, and try to entertain you while doing it. Hope you're doing good, bro. Thank you, man. Hope you're doing good as well. How are you doing? How was your day? So that's what I'm gonna be doing today. We're just gonna have some fun with it. I'll give it maybe a minute or two, see if anyone else hops onto this live stream, and then we will jump right into the video. And I have another video I think lined up if we get through this one pretty quick. That's also about more nature proofs and glory of God and things of that. So we'll jump right into that then after this video if it goes by pretty quickly. So yeah, excellent. You're doing excellent. That's great. That's great to hear. I'm glad to hear that. But yeah, so I think we will jump into it now, and we'll see what this video is all about, and we'll learn more about the craziness of nature and how it points back to God.
ويريكم آياته فأي آيات الله تنكرون.
From the galactic bodies to the tiny creatures, from the strongest to the weakest, everything in the nature follows some specified functions with precise measurements. It's because they're destined to do so. Let's for a moment think about the work of engineers or architects. They use functions and measurements to provide some properly functioning products with aesthetic appearance. In order to give you an example, let's think of a very simple function to draw a pattern in a circle, like 2x. So we start with a circle that has 10 equidistant points. Then we assign numbers to every single point. And we want to join every point with the help of given function by just replacing the x values with the number of each point. We start with the 0. 2 times 0 equals 0, so it's the same thing. Now 2 times 1 equals 2, so we connect the 1 to the 2. Then 2 times 2 equals 4. And we connect that point to the point number 4. So we continue until we get this pattern. At the beginning we started with 10 points, but if we increase the number of points, then we'll get more and more precise result with a cardioid shape. And if we change the function itself, we'll get many different patterns. But let me ask you something. Have you seen something in the nature that follows the same function? Well, the answer is yes. If you observe the reflection of light in a circular object, like a coffee cup, then you can see the same pattern. That means the photons of light are following the same function by hitting one edge of the cap and reflecting to the other edge at a calculated angle. Not only the reflection of light in a circular shape, rather everything else in the nature follows some specified rules and functions with extraordinary precision. To give you an example of the precision of those functions, let's consider the number pi. Pi is an irrational number which has infinite decimal places. It means if you have a computer at the size of universe, then the storage capacity of that computer would not be enough to store the exact value of pi unless you round it. So where did the number pi come
Actually,
from?
fun fact about that. By what I understand, there are still they still have tons of computers just still calculating pi to see if there's ever an end to pi. They have yet to find an end to pi, but I think they do actually have calculators out there that are still just on repeat that keep going through the function of pi to see if eventually it'll reach an end. But I don't think it ever will. I don't think it has an end. But yeah, but the whole light thing, that's pretty crazy. I never thought about it. Whenever I seen light reflect off water, off a cup or anything, I wouldn't have even thought about it. I wouldn't even have even connected two and two. But yeah, it's not shocking to see that these things follow function because like all of nature seems to follow, creation seems to follow order. And that's not shocking if you believe in God because you believe the world is put in order. You believe the world is created. And I like the analogy of an engineer because an engineer requires thinking, it requires forethought, it requires creativity to create a building, to create a structure. And then similarly, if you relate that to the world, you see these mathematics, you see these functions, you see this creation, you see this intricacy, which then leads us to believe that there's an intelligent design behind everything, like an engineer. And you can see that association there because we don't see complex things often coming from randomness. We see a lot of complexity coming from human minds and ingenuity, and we can relate that back to God in many ways. Hello, Omar. Welcome to the group chat. How are you doing? Impressive. Barak Allah. Nice. But yeah, it is actually rather impressive. Everything in this video is very impressive because it always goes back to it. Just always goes back to it. Blows my mind how God created this world. Really, it's just at the end of the day, it just blows my mind how God created this world and the intricacies of it all. But anyway, let's continue on.
It's actually the ratio of circumference of any circle to its diameter.
Yeah.
It means a circle can always be calculated with the number pi if we have one of its variables. Now, let's consider you have two sliding blocks and a wall, and we suppose that there is no energy loss and the surface has no friction. The first block starts by coming in at some velocity from the right, while the second one starts stationary. The simplest case is when both blocks have the same mass. The first block hits the second, transferring all of its momentum. Then the second one bounces off the wall, then transfers all of its momentum back to the first, which then sails off towards the infinity. 3 total clacks. What about if the first block has 100 times the mass of the second one? It's not entirely obvious how to predict the dynamics here, but to have a little bit understanding, let's just watch what happens. That second one will be bouncing back and forth between the wall and the first block with 100 times its mass, slowly and discreetly redirecting the first block's momentum to point in the opposite direction. In total, there will be 31 collisions before each block is sliding off to the infinity, never to be touched again. Now what if the first block will be 10,000 times the mass of the second one? In that case, there would be quite a few more clacks, all happening very rapidly at one point, adding up all into 313 collisions. Well, actually, hang on. Wait for it. Wait. Okay, 314 clacks. If it was 1,000,000 times the mass of the second one, Then again, with all our idealistic condition, almost all clocks happen in one big burst, this time resulting in 3,141 total collisions. Perhaps you have seen what's happening here. Yes, every time the number of collisions compute pi. It means the mechanism of collision in our assumed case was following a function that computes pi.
Yeah.
Of course, such thing is maybe not possible in real physics because there are some other forces acting in the universe. But that's what happens when you calculate the number of collisions between two bodies in a condition where there's no other force like gravity.
That was the one thing that always confused me in physics, was that we would do so many problems in mathematics and like science precisions assuming there's no friction. And then later on in the next year of my schooling, they added in friction and I was like, why are you making everything more difficult? But it is crazy again. It is still crazy to me. Mathematics, the ability for us to understand the world through numbers, mathematics, and facts and information is just mind blowing. Like again, that just to me, I've always been intrigued. I talked to atheists before at college. I listened to atheists, videos. I read some of their books, and they try to they always say like, well, this isn't proof of a divine mind. It's just, it comes from random chance. Or some will make the proposition that, mathematics is actually the foundation of the universe or, something like that. But in reality, it's just mathematics and laws are just reflections of how the world works. It reflects back to us how things are operating. And the fact that we're able to actually compute and understand these things, again, points back to data and information, which comes from minds. It comes from minds. And it's just the amount of precision, the amount of intricacy, the amount of beauty and ingenuity that would be required to make these sort of calculations, make these sort of formulas, requires massive, massive intelligence and design. And again, to me, this is crazy. I've never been the best at science, but I've always appreciated the beauty of science, if you will. But yeah, I don't know if there's actually any place in the universe that has no friction. Maybe a vacuum, but otherwise, there's not many.
Acting on the bodies. Or just simulate this example in a physics simulation software, and you get the amazing result. It's because pi calculates the circles, and circles are everywhere in the nature. Because every time you have a curved thing and a straight thing, in order for them to interact, there's some pi going on. Nature doesn't like always going in a straight line because sometimes things interact. If you throw a ball in the air, it's not going to go in a straight line. It's going to go in a curve. And that means lots of things in the nature follows pi. A further example is the astonishing collection of numbers, the Fibonacci series. These numbers can be appreciated in many different ways. From the standpoint of calculation, they are as easy to understand as 1 plus 1, which is 2. Then 1 plus 2 is 3. And then 2 plus 3 is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8, and so on. This series of numbers was introduced by Leonardo of Pisa. In terms of application, Fibonacci numbers appear in nature surprisingly often. The number of petals in a flower is typically a Fibonacci number, or the number of spirals on a sunflower or pineapple tends to be Fibonacci number as well. In fact, there are many more applications of Fibonacci numbers. One of the most amazing characteristics of this series is the beautiful pattern that appears in them. For example, let's consider the squares of the Fibonacci numbers. Well, you may not expect something special by adding the squares of those numbers, but let's see what the outcome is. If you add 0 plus 1, you'll get 1. By adding 1 plus 1, you'll get 2, and then 1 plus 4, you'll get 5, 4 plus 9, 13, and so on. In this pattern, you are always escaping one number in the series. But what happens by cumulative adding of the squares of this series? Here is the result. 0 plus 1 plus 1 plus 4 is 6. Add 9 to that, you'll get 15. Add 25, you'll get 40. And then add 64, you'll get 104. The results are not Fibonacci numbers, but surprisingly the Fibonacci numbers are hidden inside these numbers. Do you see them? Have a closer look. Yes, 6 is 2 times 3, 15 is 3 times 5, 40 is 5 times 8, 104 is 8 times 13, and so on.
I gotta be honest with you, I didn't
But
see
the
that.
most beautiful characteristics of this series is that it leads us to an important number called golden ratio. If you every time divide the greater number with its neighboring smaller number, then you will get the golden ratio. This ratio is also called divine proportion that can be found in numerous events in the nature.
So, same here. Despite all the evidence, someone says that everything came to existence randomly. Do they doubt the creator of the heavens and the earth? It's a rhetorical question in the Quran, and God Almighty is basically saying those who do are out of their minds without a doubt. Yeah, to me that has always been crazy because that goes back to it's called the design argument. The design argument for God, the fact that the world is so intricately created, the fact that the world is so beautiful, the fact that the world is so complex requires there to be some sort of designer. It calls us to want to worship a being or something out there because it's so beautiful, because it's so complex and all that stuff. Really what it boils down to then is the objection will always be, well, the objection will always go back to the fact of like, well, it still doesn't prove beyond a shadow of doubt that, there's something out there that made this. It could have all came by chance. It just never really appealed to me. I just never really, I never bought into it. I was always like, there's just too much here. There's just too much here to work with, that I just can't ignore the design. Like if I saw a brick wall in the middle of the desert, I wouldn't assume, well, this brick wall came from nowhere. But no, I would automatically be like, man, there was someone who made this brick wall. And something as simple as a brick wall requires a designer. Something as simple as a pillar requires a designer. Something as simple as very simple things require designers. We don't normally get those sort of things from random chance. At least not beautifully well-structured things like that from random chance. It just hardly ever happens. And the few times it does happen, it's seen as an extreme fluke. But they'll always toss it up to probability. It'll be like, yeah, it might be 1 out of a billion, but if you have a billion times of something happening over and over again, eventually you'll get the results you want. But I never really bought into that. I never really bought into that. It just doesn't really make sense to me. And besides, as I've said before on this channel, a big reason why I just never could agree with atheism is because there's no point to agree with atheism. In my eyes, I have no reason to be an atheist. If this world's meaningless, so what? Then it doesn't mean anything to me. Like the whole concept of atheism just is pointless to me. I just don't understand why I would even bother trying to believe it or defend it. I don't know why someone would so adamantly try to defend atheism. It just never appealed to me. It doesn't make sense from a common sense standpoint. I just always seem to observe creation as something beautiful and intricate and designed. And to me, that demands for us to have a creator of some sort. Fine-tuned. They are afraid of what it entails. There's nothing in this world that we know about that doesn't have a cause. So why should the universe be exception to the rule? Because we don't know. It's so weird how they think. Yeah, so actually, interestingly enough that you mentioned that, if you go back several hundred years into history, the common belief was that the common belief among Greek philosophers, the common belief among a lot of philosophers and scientists was that, well, the universe might be eternal. Because, if the universe is eternal, that meant that nature was always around and that there would be no need for a god, that the eternal thing is a universe. And that's also how you got some of these pantheistic religions and things and stuff like that. It's because you have this idea that, well, there might be an eternal universe, an eternal nature of some sorts that doesn't require a creator. And that's why a lot of scientists were discouraged and frustrated 100 years ago or whenever it was, early 1900s, early 20th century, when the Big Bang was theorized, and it seemed like there was a beginning to the universe. And when people discovered that there was a beginning to the universe, had people like Stephen Hawking who dived really deep into the details of that, it's like, oh no. This requires us to try to explain how the universe had a beginning. And then that's how you got some of these atheistic theories of, quantum physics, trying to explain it through quantum physics, trying to explain it through the singularity, trying to explain it through, all these different things. A constant scrambling to escape what appears to be the inevitable of God's existence. So yeah, it is always intriguing because I agree with you. I think a lot of times the reason why people reject God, look at creation and say there is no God, a big part of it has to do with the implications of that. At the end of the day, a lot of people just don't want to submit themselves to God. A lot of people don't want to honor God. A lot of people don't want to admit that there's a creator, because that would mean they have to live a certain way. That would mean it would demand responsibility from them. It would make them have to change their lives, and people don't want to do that. That's at the end of the day, people just don't want to live a life like that, and they want to do their own thing. Or they're angry because of suffering and things like that. There's multiple reasons, but that is a big part of it. There's nothing in this world. That's a beautiful outlook. Hundreds. Some would ask if everything needs a creator. Who created God? Yeah, the common question then would go back to like, would there need to be the creator? Who created God? You always need something to be eternal. You need something to be eternal, because if you would submit that something comes from nothing, that there can be absolutely nothing, literally nothing, and something can come from that, you would need to throw science out the window, because our whole concept of the universe and how everything works requires us to believe in cause and effect. So you need something to be eternal. Now, it is theorized that the universe has a beginning, because based on our best understanding of science as to date, the universe has a beginning, so it doesn't appear that the universe itself is eternal. And that's why a lot of these atheist philosophers and scientists are saying, well, you would have to find something eternal. So they're looking towards the quantum realm. They're looking towards some sort of singularity. But all of them are very theoretical, and none of them have been proven beyond a shadow of doubt. And that's why God is the main hypothesis, the main assertion, saying, well, God must be that eternal, that God is the eternal that has always existed. And you can't be created if you existed forever. God, by definition, is not created. He is the eternal. And he's the eternal outside of the universe, and creating the universe. And so that is always the thing. Like, if anything is created, it requires a creator, but if something's eternal, it doesn't require a creator. And the logic demands us to have something eternal. Something needs to have always existed. What that is, that will always be a debate between atheists and theists, but as a theist myself, I believe that's God. But yeah. Let's see this. The only way the petals thing wouldn't work is if like a kid went around plucking all the petals off a flower, because like obviously if a person plucked the petals off a flower, then it no longer follows that Fibonacci number or whatever it's called. I forget what it's called off the top of my head. So I don't know. Just seeing those flowers made me laugh, because I was just imagining like someone goes and plucks one, like, I broke the system. I hijacked it. No longer is it a pattern. But again, that would require, in some sort of interference with what's average or normal, following the function, stuff like that. But I don't know. It's not about that. Oh yeah, by the way, to anyone who's in the Americas or in the States, celebrating Valentine's Day or whatever, happy Valentine's Day to all of you. I mean, if you're watching this right now in the evening time in the States, you're probably single, so I mean, still happy Valentine's Day to you. Thank you for joining the live stream. Flowers, I associate that with Valentine's Day. That's how I made that jump. God Almighty is uncreated. That's why he's God Almighty. Yep, yeah, it's fine, ridiculous. Because the first cause has to be first. If there's no another God, then the first cause wouldn't be first. As necessary being, some would say. It's actually interesting. Richard Dawkins made the statement that he would be inclined to believe that potentially, he didn't say this is the case, he just said it would at least be possible that aliens created the earth, which was always funny to me, because I was always like, well, then who created the aliens? Like, it was always funny to me whenever I heard like Richard Dawkins and these people theorize intelligent beings that created the earth or created other planets were out there, because then it still demands for you to try to understand how those things were created as well. Another point some have made, even if God did create everything, why should we care? Does it prove we need to take an interest in God and serve God? That is true. So here's what I mean by that is this. If you believe in a deistic God, meaning you believe in a God who created the universe, he created the world, But he pulls back. He doesn't have anything to do with it. So, for instance, Benjamin Franklin, I believe, was a deist. He believed that there was a God who created the universe, but God had no care. He didn't care about people. He didn't care about how things played out. It was just sort of, I guess, an amusement for him. I don't know. And he created things. So yes, if God doesn't have any sort of moral care for the world, if God doesn't care about justice, if God doesn't judge people, if God doesn't have any sort of interaction in the world, it wouldn't really matter. At the end of the day, God could create the universe and said, "No, I don't want to deal with the universe. I just create it for fun." That is a possibility. That's where you start going down observation. Okay, is there morality within the world? And you observe, is there objective morality? Atheists are forced normally to say no, there's subjective morality. I've read cases where they try to argue for objective morality. I mean, Sam Harris, in his book, A Letter to a Christian Nation, he tries to argue that there can be an objective morality within an atheistic worldview. David Berlinski, in his book, The God Delusion, argues against Sam Harris and kind of debunks his theory, which I read both those books. Berlinski made the better case. But either way, you would have to start looking at things within the world, like morality, purpose, consciousness. You would have to start looking at things like, you look at systematic religions and history and things. That's when you would have to start going down that route. Because yes, you can theorize and philosophize that if the universe is created, there needs to be something eternal outside of the universe, which would be plausibly God or some sort of spirit or some sort of being, something with a mind that is able to make actions and do things. But then once you go to, well, should we serve God? Does God deserve our honor and glory? Well, then that goes into a different sort of line of thinking. You have to start thinking about morality. You have to start thinking about purpose. You have to start thinking about history and start going down that route. For me, the thing that has always actually driven me towards believing in some God that actually cares is because a deistic God who doesn't care about humanity, is the equivalence to atheism. So an atheist and a deist are basically the same thing in my eyes. An atheist will say, there is no God, I can do whatever I want. It doesn't make any difference in the end of the day because, at the end it doesn't make a difference. A deistic guy will say, there's a God out there, but he doesn't care about the universe and he'll do nothing about it. Or if he will do anything about it, he didn't reveal it to us, so we can't know. So I'm just going to do whatever I want. Either way, to me, the end result is the same. You just end up living the way you want to live. And there's no purpose behind either of them. So to me, it never made any sense to be a deist or an atheist because the end result always, to me, seemed the same. It always seemed to me that if God created this universe, he probably had a purpose for it. And observing morality, purpose, consciousness, beauty, intricacy, and observing, miraculous claims and things like that, it appears to me that God is involved in this world and that he is acting upon the world in some sort of way. And if we're supposed to have any sort of purpose in the world, and if we're supposed to have any sort of objective morality in this world, it requires God to be involved. And believing in a deistic God is pointless, just like atheism to me is pointless. Thus, it leads us to have to ask the question, so what does God want from us? What sort of life should we live? To me, it seems more practical to go down that route. Again, everything can be scrutinized to the T, and you can say, well, that's not proof that's not 100% proof or certainty. But to me, I never needed certainty, 100% certainty, because if you demand 100% certainty from everything or anything, you're always going to be empty. The only thing you can know is that you think, and even that may be questioned. But there's good confidence to believe that God is involved with the world, at least from that standpoint. Absent father kind of approach that's coming from an emotional person. It is kind of like that absent father thing, or like people respond to God from how they feel. People do reflect onto God their feelings. People reflect onto God their beliefs and thoughts and their experiences. That's a very common thing that people do. And something as humans we have to fight against. We have to fight against that urge to reflect onto God what we want him to be. Man, this took me back to my days in college and high school, man. Honors calculus, AP calculus. Crazy stuff, man. Isn't there also something about hexagons and triangles being a very common thing in nature as well? Like they showed hexagons there on the screen, and by what I remember, hexagons and triangles are very common, and you see them like everywhere as well throughout nature. Does anyone know about that? Because I remember hearing about that. I'm not sure if it's true or not though, but I just saw hexagons there, so it made me think of it. Ah, more hexagons. What was I talking about? It was right there. Circles and hexagons, man. Crazy. Although imagine if the world was like Minecraft. Everything was just a block and a square.
These were only a few examples of the perfect order that's being followed by the nature. The reason we have shown all of these to you was to once again remind you that everything in the nature is calculated with precise measurements, and that everything in the existence follows the functions that are set for them. Any rational mind can easily understand that none of these laws and regulations comes out of coincidence. Rather, such a complex universe with all its laws and functions needs a wise designer who created everything with perfect precision and set these rules to govern the entire existence.
الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض ولم يتخذ ولدا ولم يكن له شريك في الملك وخلق كل شيء فقدره تقديرا.
You know what's interesting too? An interesting philosophical question that builds off this argument is, even if you would assume that things have always acted the way they have acted throughout, history, how do you know that things will continue to act that way? There's always that has been a philosophical question that has been proposed about atheism, is that why ought we expect things to continue the way they have continued? Why should we expect this? And you say, well, it's always been that way, but that doesn't necessarily equate to what's maintaining these laws, what's maintaining these functions, what's maintaining this into the future, which has always been an interesting philosophical question also proposed to atheists. And a theist would say, like, God is maintaining the universe. But within atheism, you have to, again, believe that something eternal, something at base is maintaining the order of nature, that you can predict how things are going to follow, how you can predict the future based on past events. But anyway, that's always an interesting philosophical question as well. Interesting video. Another point is absent father kind of approach is coming from emotional person. We know by the word of Al-Rahman, the one word highlights how the Lord is always taking care of creation, just like a baby is taking care of its womb, plus the baby is oblivious to all the care. You should care because God Almighty gave you your whole life. The question is why, and the answer is to be grateful. Some will, while others will not. Don't bother reading that. I didn't read it. But yeah, that's actually like the heart of the philosopher's question when philosophers ask why. That's everyone's favorite question. Why? Why was the world created? Why do we exist? Why is this? Why is that? And then you have books and books and books and books and books and books and books on top of how they answer these why questions that humans create. And the debate goes on. What's really funny to me, what's really interesting to me is that I've read plenty of philosophy books from history past, and I've read philosophy books in modern day. So I've read Plato, Socrates, Friedrich Nietzsche, your Shakespeare. People like I've read people from antiquity, people from past, but then I also read modern day like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christian philosophers, Muslim philosophers, and things like that. The questions and the arguments and the back and forth, the same things are always raised. It's always the same questions with similar arguments presented, just structured a little bit differently and worded differently. But you kind of realize that throughout the thousands of years of history, philosophy, and religion, we're having basically the same debates and same fights and the same arguments over and over and over again, just hashed out in different words, and hashed out in different ages, hashed out with different information of science and technology and things. So it's always been intriguing to me just to see that the philosophies don't really change over time. It's just how people perceive them. It's based on people's subjective perceptions on how they interpret these arguments and what they find to be convincing. And again, the whole purpose of argumentation is try to convince people of your perspective. Believing that you're right. You believe that you're right. You try to convince people of that. Whether or not you're right, we may not always have certainty, although we may be able to have confidence. The Matrix answers that question. Everything that has being has an end. I never watched The Matrix. So I don't get the reference. I'm sorry. I mean, I know The Matrix is like a big hit. Like in reality, I should have watched The Matrix because I think everyone has watched The Matrix at this point in life. I have not watched The Matrix. You have to understand. I grew up. I grew up with basically. There was a TV. I'm not gonna say there was no TV at my house, but let's just say our TV could pull like 3 channels. Like I remember growing up with like only having 3 channels on TV. And I didn't get to watch that many movies until I was able to start driving, and I don't really watch much TV now or movies nowadays because I just don't have time. But yeah, Matrix reference, nice. I'm sure other people get that reference. I think the why is important, and as a Muslim, we find some satisfying answers in the Quran. Some find it appealing, some don't. But to be honestly, it makes the most sense out of the alternatives. I mean that's the whole purpose of religion in general. I mean, in general, the purpose of religion is to systematically give an answer to all the why questions people have. So like, I mean, if you look at any religion, the whole goal of that religion is to answer why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? Why do we exist? Why is there consciousness? Why is there suffering? Why is there pain? Why is there death? And religion tries to answer all that, and religion tries to address these problems and these concerns. And that's the whole purpose of them. That's why they exist. Again, whether or not they're true, you have to you compare, you contrast, you look at the evidence, and at the end of the day, you have to say, this is what I'm going to put my faith in. This is what I'm going to believe. An atheist says there is no God. All these religions are wrong. I'm going to trust in that. Muslim says I believe the Quran is divine revelation, and I'm going to trust in that. Christians are going to say the Bible is divine revelation. I'm going to trust in that. Jews are going to say, the Torah and the rabbinical tradition. I'm going to trust in that. Like, you can go down the line. This is what people cling on to answer their why questions in life. But that's why the world will not continue. That is why the world will not continue. It will end. I mean, actually, what's interesting about, I think, pretty much every religion, except for maybe a couple out there, is this belief that the world will end. Even atheists believe the world's going to end, but that's just because of natural causes. They believe that someday the world's just going to end by natural causes. But all the monotheistic religions believe the world's going to end at some point. I think Hinduism might. I don't know if Hinduism believes the world's going to end or not. I forget exactly what they believe. But yeah, the world is going to come to an end. It will eventually come to an end. I mean, human life is going to come to an end at some point as well. Everyone dies at some point. It's an inescapable fact of life. That's why the world will not continue. People should learn how to agree to disagree. I agree. I mean, I agree that we should learn how to agree and to disagree. Because, so fun story. I'm going to tell a fun story here to kind of emphasize that point that you're saying. So one time I was having this discussion with I was at Penn State College for an internship. I was at Penn State College. And I was living there over the summer, staying there over the summer to do my internship. And I got into this discussion with a postmodern atheist, which is basically an atheist who says there is no truth. No one can know what truth is. What you do you, I'll do me. We won't bother each other, all that stuff. And I got into a debate with this guy, and I was just like, look, you're claiming there's no such thing as truth. That's a truth claim. Don't you see the contradiction here? And we went back and forth for a little bit. And he ended up telling to me, he just said, look, I know my belief system might not be the most logical, but I just want to be happy. And I looked at him, I was like, look, that's your choice. All right? I think it's a bad choice. I disagree with what you're doing. I don't think it makes sense. But at the end of the day, hey, look, that's as far as I could go. That's as far as I could go. We're going to have to agree to disagree on what we ought to do with our lives. And you have chosen your path. I chose mine. That's what we have to do. So yeah, agreeing to disagree is an important part of life, but always remember to have these good conversations, to have these debates, to do these research, to talk to people from different perspectives. And I try to remind myself that I'm not perfect. I don't have perfect understanding of the world. I don't have perfect understanding of religion. I don't have perfect understanding of things. So I need to continue to learn. I need to continue to grow. And I will make mistakes. I will believe things that are wrong. I just pray to God that He reveals to me the truth as I continue on my journey. But yeah, it's an important fact of life to agree to disagree and to have discussions that are tough. Ask hard questions and try to sift through the answers, no matter how complex or hard they may be. Beginning, The Matrix is a classic, though. Deep. I've heard it's deep. I heard it's a deep movie. I just never got to it, man. I never had the opportunity to sit down and watch The Matrix. And yeah, but I'll have to take your word for it. I'll take your word for it, man. It must be deep. Maybe one day I'll watch it. But who knows? I don't watch a lot of movies. Everything has a beginning, it has an end. Yeah, pretty much. Actually, okay. I don't know if I exactly believe that. So there's a difference. So you have eternity. Eternity means something doesn't have a beginning or an end. It just exists forever. Immortality means that something has a beginning but has no end. So I would go and say that human spirits are immortal. Our spirits are going to live on forever, but our spirits have a beginning. Our spirit has a beginning at some point. Humans have a beginning, but their spirits will live on forever. Not everyone believes that. Not every religion believes that. But I believe that. I believe that human spirits have a beginning and they will live on forever. That can be forever in heaven, forever in hell. Some people would argue there's something in the middle. I don't believe there's something in the middle, but either way, human spirits will live on forever. So I don't know if everything. So just because something has a beginning doesn't necessarily mean it has to have an end. I don't think that necessarily logically follows, per se. Ever look into ancient civilization, how they act, how they at one point all believed in an unseen creator? An example would be Shangdi for the Chinese, and how they at one point all believed. No, I never looked back. I guess I never looked back into history and to see if they all believed in one unseen creator. I haven't delved deep into the weeds in that regard. I will say the one thing that's frustrating for me about history is is interpretation. History provides grand narratives for historical facts. And what do I mean by that? Is historians look at archaeological evidence, they look at documents, they look at nature, and then scientists might give their input with carbon dating and things like that. But anyway, you take these different facts and these different things that we know and try to synthesize them together and create a grand narrative. And that's what historians do. Historians try to take different facts and say, this is how these things came together. The one frustration I have with history is that you can create basically endless possibilities and the endless plausibilities to try to connect facts of history. Because plausibly, you can always say X led to Y, which led to Z, which led to this. It may or may not be true. Like, you don't know if it's true or not. So the one frustrating thing about history, especially if you go too far back, you start really, really stretching what we know. Because if you go back hundreds of thousands of years or 10,000 years, or if you go really far back, it gets more and more difficult to know what was actually happening back then. So that's the one thing I always struggle with history, is that there's tons of plausibilities. Again, you might argue that one plausibility makes the most sense, but at the end of the day, history is so tough because it's so subject to a lot of interpretation, which is really, really frustrating for someone like me who likes to want to know something as much as I can. But yeah, that would be something interesting to look into. I would definitely have to look into that. Ignorance is bliss, to your story. I think that was the belief. I think that is the belief of many, that if I live in ignorance, I can live in happiness. I can be happy. But at some point, knowledge is forced upon us in some way or another. True, always good to be humble. LOL. Yeah, so humility. I mean, pride is the root of pretty much all sin. Believing that we're greater than all that, and pride is so easy to succumb to. It's so easy to become prideful for so many different things. Let's see. This is about 6 minutes long. I think we got time for another video here. Some more great discussion. Again, I always love going back and forth with you guys. It's always fun doing so. But yeah, I think we got some more here. Let's see here. See what this one's like.
There are numerous examples, and no volumes can be large enough to contain them all, even if they filled the whole planet. Each atom in the universe is actually a proof on the basis of providence, whether we realize this today or will do so tomorrow. A. Insulin, the hormone that allows our bodies to use glucose, is secreted by the pancreas in the exact same amount of sugar we consume. B. The power of our hearts in pumping blood is exactly equal to the energy needed by the muscles when exerting any effort. C. The one-way valve of our stomach prevents the influx of digested food that would otherwise harm us. D. The sphincter muscles located at the gates of our orifices, without which our clothes would have been soiled the whole time. E. The skull bones that are left unfused at birth, so the baby can easily cover the journey through the birth canal without breaking its head. Had these bones been fused, the baby would have never been able to cover this journey, except if its skull got broken. These bones stay unfused till the brain is fully developed. F. All the axes of your nerves that convey the electrical signals are covered with a dielectric layer, as we do with electrical wires, so that the electric signals do not get lost or disturb us. G. The electron revolves around the nucleus at a speed of 1,000 kilometers per second.
All right, I will say one thing about atoms that amaze me. Atoms are mostly space. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about the fact that electrons, neutrons, and protons, that atoms are basically 99% space. They make up like 1% of an atom is actually matter, of actual physical substance. The rest of it is just empty space. It's just always amazed me. I'm like, my desk that I'm sitting at right now, my laptop, is made up of atoms, and it's mostly space, but there's so many atoms, so millions and millions and billions of atoms in this room that make it that I can actually stand and walk, and it feels like solid physical matter is everywhere. But atoms themselves are just mostly space, which just blows my mind, which is crazy. Salima, welcome to the chat. Hello, how are you doing today, Salima? Glad you could tune in. How was your day? Yeah.
Second, or otherwise, it would collapse inside the nucleus by the force of attraction of the positive nucleus.
Also, I will note this guy's voice is fun to listen to. I don't know what it is. I think he's British. I'm not sure exactly. He sounds British almost. But there's always something to me about certain accents. There's certain accents out there that you just listen to them, you're like, they sound smart. They sound intelligent. They could probably be saying the dumbest thing, and I would still think they sound intelligent. He is not saying anything dumb, but there's just some accents out there, some voices that just capture your attention. You're like, man, I could listen to that guy all day. But yeah.
And the universe would have collapsed before it even began. So, this is the ideal speed for forming the atom.
You know what? Interesting that he mentions that too, because Stephen Hawking actually, when he was doing his research, made the statement that he's like, the fact that the universe exists is one out of trillions and trillions of chances of happening. And he says more times than not, the universe would have just collapsed, and the universe would never have existed because it would just collapse on itself. Like that was the most probable route, was that the universe collapsed on itself, but it didn't. And even Stephen Hawking recognized the fact that this was pretty much impossible for the universe to exist because of that. It's so improbable. But as everyone knows, Stephen Hawking was not religious. He was very much of an atheist.
H. When two atoms of hydrogen combine, 0.7% of the hydrogen mass turns into energy. If this mass was 0.6% instead of 0.7%, the proton would have not combined with the neutrons, and the universe would have remained in the form of hydrogen, and none of the other elements would have been formed. If the mass converted to energy was 0.8% instead of 0.7%, the fusion would have been too fast, which would have led to the disappearance of hydrogen immediately from the universe, making life impossible. That's why this...
Also making it impossible for people to get really high pitched voices. Has anyone here ever sucked on... Oh, no, that's helium, not hydrogen. My bad. Wait, does hydrogen make your voice deeper? I forget. But I just know helium. Suck on helium makes your voice higher.
Figure had to be between 0.6% and 0.8%.
Crazy.
I, the electron mass, constitutes 0.2% of the neutron mass, and this mass is ideal for forming the atom. J. After germination, the buds tend to go up directly to the light source, whereas the roots tend to go down because the buds are highly sensitive to light. All the information they need to function is encoded within the seed, and there are hormones that control the upper and lateral growth of the plant, as well as the growth toward the roots, all of which is encoded within the seed. You eat the delicious fruit and throw the dry and tasteless pit away. This way, you are compelled by a controller who governs the whole universe, allowing that fruit to pass its genes all over the earth, giving you the savory taste while hiding the genes in the core of a smooth, dry pit that is not attractive to you. Once the seeds stick to the ground, it starts quietly transforming into branches and roots, and this is how the mother succeeds in passing her genes on to its children. All of this takes place in a plant that has no cognition. So, who adjusted the information for those deaf-mute fruits? And who adjusted the amount of sugar so it would appeal to your palate? Who made the seed unappealing so you could dispense with it and throw it away? Who loaded the seed with sufficient genetic information to create a new plant with all its details and functions? K.
It's funny. He goes through all that. He goes through all that questioning. Yeah. As I saw the comments here. Good to hear. I'm glad you're doing fine, Salim. I'm glad you're doing fine, and I'm glad you can join us. It's the British accent. It's definitely the British accent, my dude. It definitely is. I don't know, man. British accents, they just sound smart. I don't know what it is. Do you think British accents or Brits themselves sound smart to themselves? Like they hear a British accent, like that guy's smart, or do you think that they hear like an Indian accent or like that's smart? Like what voice appeals to them? I wonder what voice appeals to someone from Britain. Chipmunks, yeah, that's what that definitely sounds like when you have that extremely high voice. There are two evidences for God Almighty: nature and His speech. I found His speech more powerful, for His speech is uncreated, while nature is. Yeah, I mean, God. There is this idea, especially if you look actually like pretty much in most religions, they will often say that God's speech or the way God spoke to the world, or God's religious texts or whatever you want to call them, in of themselves appeal to human hearts, in of themselves appeal to humans, and reveal His glory. That's actually a belief within a lot of religions that I've looked into to certain levels. The way they would explain it or the way they believe it is a little bit different. But yeah, the evidence from nature and the evidence from like God Himself, and then you have also like the metaphysical evidence, like consciousness, morality, things like that. But what I was going to say was about those list of questions he asked. The interesting thing would be that an atheist would then hop in, like for instance, Richard Dawkins would say, all this complexity came from one simple thing and evolved. And they would just say evolution is the reason why all this happened. Seeds, there was millions of seeds out there. Some grew, some didn't. The ones that grew were favorable. The ones who didn't, and they passed on their genes, and that's how you got what you got today. That would inevitably be the answer they give. Again, which to me just never seemed appealing. Never seemed that appealing to me. But that's how you would have to answer the question.
Lately, the scientists have been discussing the total mass of the universe and how it is essential for our existence on Earth. Inertia, this blessing which is given to our bodies in the form of resistance to any change in movement, originates from the mass of the universe. Had the inertia been any less than what it is, Any soft breeze of wind would have been able to move the rocks, which would not have been able to resist the least amount of effort exerted on them. In a universe like ours, we would have been bombarded by all sorts of flying bodies. If the inertia was more than what it is, we would have found a great difficulty in moving our fingers, if we even managed to move them, and controlling them would have been an improbability. This means we would have been unable to move or do any tangible effort of any kind. The first man created would have not left his spot, and the embryos would have not left the wombs. That is, if they even managed to take form in the wombs. That's why it is particularly interesting that the inertia of any matter had to be identically what it is right now. The thing that baffled the physicists here, as we see in the book, Unity of the Universe by Dennis William Sciyama, is that of this inertia, the whole of the Milky Way galaxy only contributes 1/10,000,000th, the Sun contributes 100,000,000th, and the Earth itself contributes 1,000,000,000th. This leads us to realize that this ideal inertia we live on, and which allows us to partake on all our activities, is the overall value of the whole universe. Consequently, we can particularly say that our existence depends precisely on the mass of the whole universe and its very existence. Allah says what means, "We did not create heaven and earth, and all that is between them in vain." That is the opinion of those who deny the truth. Woe betide those who deny the truth, when they are cast into the fire. Chapter 38, verse 27. The more we ponder and look, the more we realize the marvels, the wisdom, and the intricacies of this creation.
Yeah. Again, to me, this creation in of itself is just a miracle. It truly is. It truly is just. It's incredible. It really is. Thoughts on the following analogy: the maker of the computer doesn't become the computer, nor is the maker subjected by the law the computer runs by, nor is the maker made of the same material. If you're referring to, I guess, software engineering, or you're saying, so let me read that again. The maker of the computer doesn't become the computer, nor is the maker subjected by the laws the computer runs by, nor is the maker made of the same material. I guess in the sense of, you're talking about computer scientists and the algorithms and the functions and the things they create is true, and often they don't necessarily become those things. I guess, yes, I would agree with that concept of that. Does that mean that anything that is created, anything that people create, cannot be created, they cannot become that thing or whatever? I don't know if that is necessarily always the case, but in the analogy that you're using, yes, that is the case. The maker would not become the computer software per se. Although arguably people might say that one day humans will be able to perfectly replicate humans. They will be able to create humans again and stuff like that. Even though they themselves may not become directly those people, they can make their being or their creation or whatever. All existence is multiple computers, from the laws to objects to life to death, emotions, pretty much everything we know and everything we don't know. Everything we see is the reason why we're able to predict things. The reason why we're able to predict the future or make scientific claims, have scientific method, and do things like that is because of the order of things, how things are put into place, how things are put into order, and so forth. So to go down that route. So that's part of the idea that we believe the world is created intricate goes into the fact that it has this order and these things like that, which is, again, just incredible. It's crazy. Those are the two videos I wanted to watch. It's been about an hour, and I got to get work done tonight like usual. So thank you for joining, everyone. And as always, go out there and light the world, my friends. And thank you for everyone who joined me today. Have a good one.